Seriously, Twitch, I just ran 3 minutes of ads and you're going to run another 3? What the hell? And why am I so short? Don't answer that. It's genetics. But anyway, been a while, everyone. Why is my voice so fucked up? Do I need to refilter things? I thought I had filters on this one. Oh no, I had the other one filtered. Okay, maybe now it'll sound better? Not really. Now? Maybe? Okay, I don't hear the whistling anymore. That's good. But yeah, it's been a while, everyone. I've been a little off the rocker the past couple weeks. Pretty much I was recovering from my subathon. Which again, I would like to thank everyone who participated. And I hope the 3 people that got the books will enjoy them. They are still for sale. And I really don't know why Twitch decided to run another 3 minutes of ads. Okay, I see someone posted something, but my computer's lagging out. Oh, that was just me. Okay. But yeah, I don't know what the hell is going on with Twitch. I mean, I literally ran a 3-minute ad spot and then it ended and Twitch started a second one. But anyway, we are doing Sherlock Holmes tonight. Finally. And we are doing the casebook of Sherlock Holmes as it is what was voted on. Which is going to be really confusing for when I do the editing and everything else, because his final bow is before this one. But, you know, I'll edit that timeline when I get to it. So, let me go ahead and do my sharing and such. Like, hey, Twitterverse, I'm actually streaming. And I must have any notifications. Let's see. Do 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 do. Okay, I'm hearing sound effects from other streams. Let's say, what the hell am I hearing here? I'm lurking in a couple of streams, so I'm hearing what's going on there. So, just I like doing that kind of thing. But anyway, hi, how you doing? It is what time is it? It is 9:08. So let's go ahead and get over to the study, which I'm pretty sure I have everything set up. There you go. This is the book. And if you don't know, most of the books are compilations. As they had to collect all the short stories that were published in the magazines, and put them all together and make a book. This one is technically the last one actually done by Arthur Conan Doyle. Mostly because he was tired. As you will find out when I read you the introduction. Hey, Guilty, thank you for being first. And you, hold on, I don't know if any of my stuff's set up. Oh, I didn't know I could chat scroll now. That's cool. Oh, I did not reset this up. Glad I looked. Okay. But anyway, I've got new emotes. I cannot remember which level I set them for. I tried to make sure most of them were in the free or the level 1 subscriber. I only have 2 that are higher than level 1, so. Man, my fireplace is loud. I'm not just hearing it loud. Check that real quick. Okay, that's good. But anyway. The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. Preface. I fear that Mr. Sherlock Holmes might become like one of those popular tenors who, having outlived their time, are still tempted to make repeated farewell bows to their indulgent audiences. This must cease, and he must go the way of all flesh, material or imaginary. One likes to think that there is some fantastic limbo for the children of imagination, some strange, impossible place where the bow of Fielding may still make love to the bells of Richardson, where Scott's heroes may still strut, Dickens's delightful cockneys still raise a laugh, and Thackeray's wildlings continue to carry on their reprehensible careers. Perhaps in some humble corner of such a Valhalla, Sherlock and Watson may find a time and place, while some more astute sleuth with some even less astute comrade may fill the stage which they have vacated. His career has been a long one, although it is possible to exaggerate it. Decrepit gentlemen who approach me and declare that his adventures formed the reading of their boyhood do not meet the response from me which they seem to expect. One is not anxious to have one's personal dates handled so unkindly. As a matter of cold fact, Holmes made his debut in A Study in Scarlet, and in The Sign of Four, two small booklets which appeared between 1887 and 1889. It was in 1881 that A Scandal in Bohemia, the first of his long series of short stories, appeared in Strand magazine. The public seemed appreciative and desirous of more, so that from that date, 36 years ago, they have been provided in a broken series which now contains no fewer than 56 stories, republished in The Adventures, The Memoirs, The Return, and His Last Bow. And there remain these 12 published during the last few years, which are here produced under the title of The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. He began his adventures in the very heart of the latter Victorian era, carried it through the all-too-short reign of Edward, and has managed to hold his own little niche even in these feverish days. Thus, it would be true to say that those who read him as young men have lived to see their grown-up children following the same adventures in the same magazine. It is a striking example of the patience and loyalty of the British public. I had fully determined at the conclusion of the memoirs to bring Holmes to an end, as I felt that my literary energies should not be directed too much into one channel. That pale, clear-cut face and loose-limbed figure were taking up an undue share of my imagination. I did the deed, but fortunately no coroner had pronounced upon the remains, and so, after a long interval, it was not difficult for me to respond to the flattering demand and to explain my rash act away. I have never regretted it, for I have not in actual practice found that these lighter sketches have prevented me from exploring and finding my limitations in such varied branches of literature as history, poetry, historical novels, psychic research, and the drama. Had Holmes never existed, I could not have done more, though he may perhaps have stood a little in the way of the recognition of my more serious literary work. And so, reader, farewell to Sherlock Holmes. I thank you for your past constancy, but can hope that some return has been made in the shape of a distraction from the worries of life and the stimulating change of thought which can only be found in the fairy kingdom of romance. Arthur Conan Doyle. Needless to say, some authors do get tired of writing. And he pretty much said that Sherlock Holmes has overshadowed his writing career. Which I guess is completely understandable, to be honest. And I wish I had pronounced that first section a lot clearer. But, as it were, we have a story to read. So let me get into that, shall we? The Adventure of the Illustrious Client. "It can't hurt now," was Mr. Sherlock Holmes's comment when for the 10th time in as many years I asked his leave to reveal the following narrative. So it was that at last I obtained permission to put on record what was, in some ways the supreme moment of my friend's career. Both Holmes and I had a weakness for the Turkish bath. It was over a smoke in the pleasant lassitude of the drawing-room that I found him less reticent and more human than anywhere else. On the upper floor of the Northumberland Avenue establishment there was an isolated corner where two couches lie side by side, and it was on these that we lay upon September 3rd, 1902, the day that my narrative begins. I had asked him whether anything was stirring, and for answer he had shot his long, thin, nervous arms out of the sheets which enveloped him, and had drawn an envelope from the inside pocket of the coat which hung beside him. "It may be some fussy, self-important fool. It may be a matter of life or death," he said as he handed me the note. "I know no more than this message tells me." It was from the Carlton Club, and dated the evening before. This is what it read. "Sir James Damery presents his compliments to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and will upon him at 4:30 tomorrow. Sir James begs to say that the matter upon which he desires to consult Mr. Holmes is very delicate, and also very important. He trusts, therefore, that Mr. Sherlock Holmes will make every effort to grant this interview, and that he will confirm it over the telephone to the Carlton Club." "I need not say that I have confirmed it, Watson," said Holmes as I returned the paper. "Do you know anything of this man Damery?" "Only that his name is a household word in society." "Well, I can tell you a little more than that. He has rather a reputation for arranging delicate matters which are to be kept out of the papers. You may remember his negotiations with Sir George Lewis over his Hammerford will case. He is a man of the world with a natural turn for diplomacy. I am bound, therefore, to hope that it is not a false scent, and that he has some real need for our assistance." "Our?" "Well, if you will be so good, Watson." "I will be honored." "Then you have an hour, 4:30. Until then we can put the matter out of our heads." "I was in her own rooms at Queen Anne Street at the time, but I was round Baker Street before the time named. Sharp at the half hour, Colonel Sir James Damery was announced. It is hardly necessary to describe him, for many will remember that large, bluff, honest personality, that broad, clean-shaven face, above all, that pleasant, mellow voice. Frankness shone from his grey Irish eyes, and good humour played round his mobile, smiling lips. His lucent top hat, his dark frock coat, indeed, every detail, from the pearl pin of the satin cravat to the lavender spats over the varnished shoes, spoke of meticulous care in dress for which he was famous. The big, masterful aristocrat dominated the little room. "Of course I was prepared to find Dr. Watson," he remarked with a courteous bow. "His collaboration may be very necessary, for we are dealing on this occasion, Mr. Holmes, with a man to whom violence is familiar and who will, literally, stick it to nothing. I should say that there is no more dangerous man in Europe." "I have had several opponents to whom the flattering term has been applied," said Holmes with a smile. "Don't you smoke? Then you will excuse me if I light my pipe. If your man is more dangerous than the late Professor Moriarty, or than the living Colonel Sebastian Morin, then he is indeed worth meeting. May I ask his name?" "Have you heard of Baron Grunner?" "You mean the Austrian murderer?" Colonel Damery threw up his kid-gloved hands with a laugh. "There's no getting past you, Mr. Holmes. Wonderful. You have already sized him up as a murderer." "It is my business to follow the details of continental crime. Who would possibly have read what happened in Prague and have any doubts as to the man's guilt? It was purely technical, legal point in the suspicious death of a witness that saved him. I am as sure that he killed his wife when the so-called accident happened in the Spilligen Pass as if I had seen him do it. I knew also that he had come to England, and had a presentation that sooner or later he would find some work to do. Well, what has Baron Grunner been up to? I presume it is not this old tragedy which has come up again. No, it is more serious than that. To revenge crime is important, but to prevent it is more so. It is a terrible thing, Mr. Holmes, to see a dreadful event, an atrocious situation, preparing itself before your eyes. To clearly understand whether it will lead, and yet to be utterly unable to avert it. Can a human being be placed in a more trying position? Perhaps not. Then you will sympathize with the client in whose interests I am acting. I did not understand that you were merely an intermediary. Who is the principal? Mr. Holmes, I must beg you not to press that question. It is important that you should be able to assure him that his honored name has been in no means dragged into the matter. His motives are, to the last degree, honorable and chivalrous, but he prefers to remain unknown. I need not say that your fees will be assured and that you will be given a perfectly free hand. Surely the actual name of your client is immaterial. I'm sorry, said Holmes. I am accustomed to have mystery from one end of my cases, but not to have it at both ends. It is confusing. I fear, Sir James, that I must decline the act. Our visitor was greatly disturbed. His large, sensitive face was darkened with emotion and disappointment. You hardly realize the effect of your own action, Mr. Holmes, said he. You place me in a most serious dilemma, for I am perfectly certain that you would be proud to take over the case if I could give you the facts. Yet I promise forbids me from revealing them all. May I, at least, lay all that I can before you? By all means, as long as it is necessary that I commit myself to nothing. That is understood. In the first place, you have no doubt heard of General de Merville? De Merville of Carver fame? Yes, I have heard of him. He has a daughter, Violet de Merville, young, rich, beautiful, accomplished, a wonder woman in every way. It is this daughter, this lovely, innocent girl, whom we are endeavoring to save from the clutches of a fiend. Baron Grunner has some hold over her, then? The strongest of all holds where a woman is concerned, the hold of love. The fellow is, as you may have heard, extraordinarily handsome, with a most fascinating manner, a gentle voice, and that air of romance and mystery that means so much to a woman. He is said to have the whole sex at his mercy, and to have made ample use of that fact. But how came such a man to meet a lady of the standing of Miss Violet de Merville? It was on a Mediterranean yachting voyage. The company, though select, paid for their own passages. No doubt the promoters hardly realized the Baron's true character until it was too late. The villain attached himself to the lady, and with such effect that he has completely and absolutely won her heart. To say that she loves him hardly expresses it. She dotes upon him. She is obsessed with him. Outside of him there is nothing on earth. She will not hear one word against him. Everything has been done to cure her of her madness, but in vain. To sum up, she proposes to marry him next month. As she is of age, and he has will of iron, it is hard to know how to prevent her. Does she know about the Austrian episode? The cunning devil has told her every unsavory public scandal in his past life, but in always such a way as to make himself out to be the innocent martyr. She absolutely accepts his version and will listen to no other. Dear me, you surely do have inadvertently let out the name of your client. It is no doubt the General of Merville. Our visitor fidgeted in his chair. I could deceive you by saying so, Mr. Holmes, but it would not be true. De Merville is a broken man. A strong soldier has been utterly demoralized by this incident. He has lost the nerve which never failed him on the battlefield and become a weak, doddering old man, utterly incapable of contending with a brilliant, forceful rascal like this Austrian. My client, however, is an old friend, one who has known the general intimately for many years, and has taken a paternal interest in this young girl since she wore short frocks. He cannot see this tragedy consummated without some attempt to stop it. There is nothing in which Scotland Yard can act. It was his own suggestion that you should be called in, but it was, as I have said, on the express stipulation that he should not be personally involved in the matter. I have no doubt, Mr. Holmes, that your great powers you could easily trace my clients back through me, but I must ask you, as a point of honor, to refrain from doing so, and to not break in upon his incognito. Holmes gave a whimsical smile. I think I may safely promise that, said he. I may add that your problem interests me, and that I shall be prepared to look into it. How shall I keep in touch with you? The Colton Club is where you will find me, but in case of emergency, there is a private phone call. XX31. Holmes noted it down. And sat, still smiling, with the open memorandum book upon his knee. The Baron's present address, please. Vernon Lodge, near Kingston. It is a lodge house. He has been fortunate in some rather shady speculations, and is a rich man, which naturally makes him a more dangerous antagonist. Is he home at present? Yes. Apart from what you have told me, can you give me any further information about the man? He has expensive tastes. He is a horse fancier. For a short time he played polo at Hurlingham, but then this Prague affair got noised about and he had to leave. He collects books and pictures. He is a man of considerable artistic side to his nature. He is, I believe, a recognized authority upon Chinese pottery, and has written a book upon the subject. A complex mind, said Holmes. All great criminals are that. My old friend Charlie Peace was a violin virtuoso. Wainwright was no mean artist. I could quote many more. Well, Sir James, you will inform your clients that I am turning my mind upon Baron Gruner. I can say no more. I have some sources of information of my own, and I dare say we may find some means of opening up the matter. When our visitor had left us, Holmes sat so long in deep thought that it seemed to me that he had forgotten my presence. At last, however, he came briskly back to earth. Well, Watson, any views? He asked. I should think you had better see the young lady herself. My dear Watson, if her poor broken old father cannot move her, how shall I, a stranger, prevail? And yet there is something in the suggestion if all else fails. But I think we must begin from a different angle. I rather fancy the Shinwell Johnson might be of some help. I had not occasion to mention Shinwell Johnson in these memoirs, because I have seldom drawn my cases from the later phases of my friend's career. During the first years of the century, he became a valuable assistant. Johnson, I grieve to say, made his name first a dangerous villain, and served 2 terms at Parkhurst. Finally, he repented and allied himself to Holmes, acting as an agent in the huge criminal underworld of London, and obtaining information which often proved to be of vital importance. Had Johnson been a knock of the police, he would have soon been exposed. But as he dealt with cases that never came directly into the courts, his activities were never realized by his companions. With the glamour of his 2 convictions upon him, he had the entrée of every nightclub, doss house, and gambling den in town, and his quick observation and active brain made him an ideal agent for gaining information. It was to him that Sherlock Holmes now proposed to turn. It was not possible for me to follow the immediate steps taken by my friend, for I had some pressing professional business of my own. But I met him at an appointment that evening at Simpson's, where, sitting by a small table in the front window, and looking down at the rushing stream of life in the Strand, he told me something of what had passed. "Johnson is on the prowl," he said. "He may pick up some garbage in the darker recesses of the underworld, for it is down there, amid the black roots of crime, that we must hunt for this man's secrets." "But if the lady will not accept what is already known, why should any fresh discovery of yours turn her from her purpose?" "Who knows, Watson? Woman's heart and mind are as solvable puzzles as the male. Murder might be condoned or explained, and yet some smaller offense might rankle. Baron Grunner remarked to me—" "He remarked to you?" "Oh, to be sure. I had not told you of my plans. Well, Watson, I love to come to close grips with my man. I like to meet him eye to eye and read for myself the stuff that he is made of. When I had given Johnson his instructions, I took a cab out to Kingston and found the Baron in a most affable mood." "Did he recognize you?" "There was no difficulty about that. I simply sent in my card. He is an excellent antagonist, cool as ice, silky-voiced and soothing as one of your fashionable consultants, and poisonous as a cobra. He has breed in him, a real aristocrat of crime, with a superficial suggestion of afternoon tea and all the cruelty of the grave behind it. Yes, I'm glad I've had my attention called to Baron Adalbert Gruner." "You say he was affable?" "A purring cat who thinks he sees prospective mice. Some people's affinity is more deadly than the violence in coarser souls. His greeting was characteristic. 'I rather thought I should see you sooner or later, Mr. Holmes,' said he. 'You have been engaged, no doubt, by General de Merivale to endeavor to stop our marriage to his daughter, Violet. That is so, is it not?' I acquiesced. 'My dear man,' he said, you will only ruin your own well-deserved reputation. It is not a case in which you can possibly succeed. You have a barren work, to say nothing of incurring some danger. Let me very strongly advise you to draw off at once.' 'It is curious,' I answered, 'but that was the very advice which I had intended to give you. I have a respect of your brains, Baron, and the little which I have seen of your personality has not lessened it. Let me put it to you as man to man. No one wants to rake up your past and make you unduly uncomfortable. It is over, and you are now in the smooth waters. But if you persist in this marriage, you will raise up a swarm of powerful enemies who will never leave you alone until they have made England too hot to hold you. Is the game worth it? Surely you would be wiser if you left the lady alone. I would not be pleasant for you if the facts of your past were brought to her notice. The Baron has little wax lips of hair under his nose, like the sort of antennae of an insect. He's quivering with amusement as he listened, and finally he broke into a gentle chuckle. 'Excuse my amusement, Mr. Holmes,' said he, 'but it is really funny to see you trying to play a hand with no cards in it. I don't think anyone could do it better, but it is rather pathetic all the same. Not a color card here, Mr. Holmes. Nothing but the smallest of the small.' 'So you think?' 'So I know. Let me make a thing clear for you, for my own hand is so strong that I can afford to show it. I have been fortunate enough to win the entire affection of this lady. This was given to me in spite of the fact that I told her very clearly of all the unhappy incidents of my past life. I also told her that certain wicked and designing persons, I hope you recognize yourself, would come to tell her these things, and I warned her how to treat them. You have heard of post-hypnotic suggestion, Mr. Holmes?' 'Yes, well, you see how well it works, for a man of personality can use hypnotism without any vulgar passes or tomfoolery. So she is ready for you, and I have no doubt will give you an appointment. for she is quite amiable to her father's will, save only in one little matter. Well, Watson, there seemed to be no more to say, so I took my leave with as much cold dignity as I could summon. But as I left my hand on the door handle, he stopped me. "By the way, Mr. Holmes," he said, "do you know Lebrun, the French agent?" "Yes," said I. "Do you know what befell him?" "I heard that he was beaten by some Apaches in the Montmartre district and crippled for life." "Quite true, Mr. Holmes. By a curious coincidence, he had been inquiring into my affairs only a week before." "Don't do it, Mr. Holmes. It's not a lucky thing to do. Several have found that out. My last word to you is, go your own way and let me go mine. Goodbye." "So, there you are, Watson. You are now up to date." "This fellow seems dangerous." "Mighty dangerous. I disregard the blusterer, but this is the sort of man who says rather less than he means." "Must you interfere? Does it really matter if he marries the girl?" "Considering that he undoubtedly murdered his last wife, I should say it mattered very much. Besides, the client. Well, we need not discuss that. When you have finished your coffee, you had best come home with me, and for the blithe Shinwell will be there with his report." "We found him, sure enough, the huge, coarse, red-faced, scar-bottomed man, with a pair of vivid black eyes which were the only external sign of the very cunning mind within. It seems that he had dived down into what was particularly his kingdom. Beside him on the settee was a brand which he had brought up from the shape of a slim, flame-like young woman with a pale, intense face, youthful, and yet so worn with sin and sorrow that one read the terrible years which had left their leprous mark upon her. "This is Miss Kitty Winter," said Shadwell Johnson, waving his fat hand as an introduction. "What she don't know, well, there, she'll speak for herself. Put my hand right on her, Mr. Holmes, within an hour of your message." "I'm easy to find," said the young woman. "Hell, London gets me every time. Same address as Porky Shinwell. We're old mates, Porky, you and I. But by cripes, there's another one who ought to be down in a lower hell than we if there was any justice in the world. That is the man you're after, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled. "I gather you have your good wishes, Miss Winter." "If I can help to put him where he belongs, I'm yours to rattle," said our visitor with fierce energy. There was an intensity of hatred in her white, set face and her blazing eyes such a woman seldom and a man never can attain. "You needn't go into my past, Mr. Holmes. That's neither here nor there. But what I am, Albert Grunner made me. If I could pull him down—" She clutched frantically with her hands into the air. "Oh, if I could pull him down into the pit where he has pushed so many!" "You know how the matter stands?" "Porky Shinwell was telling me. He's after some other poor fool and wants to marry her this time. You want to stop it. Well, you surely know enough about this devil to prevent any decent girl in her senses wanting to be in the same parish with him." "She is not in her senses. She is madly in love. She has been told all about him. She cares nothing." "Told about the murder?" "Yes." "My lord, she has a nerve." "She puts them all down to slanders." "Couldn't you lay proofs before her silly eyes?" "Well, can you help us to do so?" "Ain't I a proof myself? If I stood before her and told her how he used me—" "Would you do this?" "Would I? Would I not?" "Well, it might be worth trying. But he has told her most of the sins, and she has pardoned from her. And I understand she will not reopen the question." "I'll lay he didn't tell her all," said Miss Winter. I caught a glimpse of one or two of the murderers besides the one that made such a fuss. He would speak to someone in his velvet way and then look at me with a steady eye and say, "He died within a month." It wasn't hot air either, but I took little notice, you see. I loved him myself at that time. Whatever he did went with me, same as this poor fool. There's just one thing that shook me. Yes, by cripes, if it had not been for his poisonous lying tongue that explains ensues, I had left him that very night. It's a book he has, a brown leather book with a lock, and his arms in gold on the outside. I think he was quite drunk that night, or he should not have shown it to me. What was it, then? I tell you, Mr. Holmes, this man collects women, and takes a pride in his collection, and then some men collect moths or butterflies. He had it all in that book. Snapshot photographs, names, details, everything about them. It was a beastly book. A book no man, even if he had come from the gutter, could have put together. But it was Adelaide Grinner's book all the same. Souls I have ruined. He could have put that on the outside if he had been so minded. However, that's neither here nor there, for the book would not serve you. And if it would, you can't get at it. Where is it? How can I tell you where it is now? It's more than a year since I left him. I know where he kept it then. He's a precise, tidy cat of a man in many of his ways. So maybe it is still in the pigeonhole in the old bureau in the inside study. Do you know his house? I've been in his studies, said Holmes. Have you, though? You haven't been slow on the job if you only started this morning. Maybe dear Adalbert has met his match this time. The outer study is the one with the Chinese crockery in it. Big glass cupboard between the windows. Then behind his desk is the door that leads to the inner study, a small room where he keeps papers and things. Is he not afraid of burglars? Adalbert is no coward. His worst enemy couldn't say that of him. He can look after himself. There's a burglar alarm at night. Besides, what is there for a burglar unless they got away with his fancy crockery? Not good, said General Johnson, with the decided voice of the expert. No offense wants stuff of that sort that you can neither smelt nor sell. Quite so, said Holmes. Well, now, Miss Winter, if you would call here tomorrow evening at 5, I would consider in the meanwhile whether your suggestion of seeing this lady personally may not be arranged. I am exceedingly obliged to you for your cooperation. I need not say that my clients will consider liberally. None of that, Mr. Holmes, cried the young woman. I am not out for money. Let me see this man in the mud, and I've got all I worked for. In the mud with my foot on his cursed face. That's my price. I'm with you tomorrow or any other day as long as you are on his track. Porky here can always tell you where to find me. I did not see Holmes again until the following evening, when we dined once more with our Strand restaurant. He shrugged his shoulders when I asked him what luck he had with the interview. Then he told me the story, which I would repeat in this way. His hard, dry statements need some little editing so often into the terms of real life. There was no difficulty at the moment of the appointment, said Holmes, for the girl glories in showing abject filial obedience in all the secondary things, and had attempted to atone for her flagrant breach of her engagement. The general phoned that all was ready, and the fiery Miss W. turned up according to schedule, so that at 5:30 a cab deposited us outside 104 Berkeley Square, where the old soldier resides, one of the awful grey London castles which would make a good church seem frivolous. The footman showed us into the great yellow-curtained drawing-room, and there was a lady waiting us, demure, pale, self-contained, and inflexible as remote as a snow image on a mountain. I don't quite know how to make her clear to you, Watson. Perhaps you may meet her before we are through, and you can use your own gift of words. She is beautiful, but with an ethereal other-world beauty, some fantastic whose thoughts are set on high. I've seen such faces in the pictures of old masters in the Middle Ages. How a beast man could have laid his vile paws on such a being of the beyond, I cannot imagine. You may have noticed how extremes call to each other. The spiritual to the animal, the caveman to the angel. You never saw a worse case than this. She knew what we had come for, of course, that the villain had lost no time in poisoning her mind against us. Miss Winter's advent rather amazed her, I think, but she waved us into our respective chairs, like the Reverend Abbeys receiving two rather leprous mendicants. If your head is inclined to swell, my dear Watson, take a course from Miss Violet de Merville. I was sorry for her, Watson. I thought of her as the moment as I could have thought of the daughter of my own. I am often eloquent. I use my head, not my heart. But I really did plead with her with all the warmth of words I could find in my nature. I pictured her with that awful position of the woman who only wakes to a man's character after she is his wife. A woman who has to submit to crisps, bloody hands, and lecherous lips. I spared her nothing. The shame, the fear, the agony, the hopelessness of it all. All my hot words could not bring one tinge of color to those ivory cheeks, or one gleam of emotion to those abstract eyes. I thought of what the rascal had said about the post-hypnotic influence. One could really believe that she was living above the earth in some ecstatic dream. Yet there was nothing indefinite in her replies. "I have listened to you with patience, Mr. Holmes," said she. "The effect upon my mind is exactly as predicted. I am aware that that my fiancé, has had a stormy life in which he has occurred bitter hatreds and the most unjust aspirations. You are only the last of the series who have brought their slanders before me. Possibly you mean well, though I learn that you are a paid agent who could have only equally been willing to act for the Baron as against him. But in any case, I wish you to understand once and for all that I love him and that he loves me, and that the opinion of all the world is no more to me than the twitter of the birds outside this window. If his noble nature has ever for an instant fallen, it may be that I have been specially sent to raise it from its true and lofty level. I am not clear," here she turned her eyes toward my companion, "who this young lady may be." I was about to answer when the girl broke into a whirlwind. If ever you saw flame and ice face to face, it was those two women. "I'll tell you who I am," she cried, springing out of her chair, her mouth all twisted with passion. "I am his last mistress. I am one of 100 that he has tempted and has used and ruined through the use and thrown into the refuse heap, as he will you also. Your refuse heap is more likely to be a grave, and maybe that's the best. I tell you, you foolish woman, that if you marry this man, he'll be the death of you. It may be a broken heart, or it may be a broken neck, and he'll have you one way or the other. It's not out of love for you I'm speaking. I don't care a tinker's curse whether you live or die. It's out of hate for him and spite to him, and I'm to get back at him for what he did to me. But it's all the same. And you needn't look at me like that, my fine lady, for you may be lower than I am before you are through with it." "I should prefer not to discuss such matters," said Miss de Merville coldly. "Let me say once and for all, I am aware of the 3 passages in my fiancé's life in which he has become estranged with designing women, and that I am assured of his hearty repentance for any evil that he may have done." "3 passages!" screamed my companion. "You fool! You unutterable fool!" "Mr. Holmes, I beg that you will bring this interview to an end," said the icy voice. "I have obeyed my father's wish in seeing you, but I am not compelled to listen to the ravings of this person." With an oath, Miss Winter darted forward, and if I had not caught her by the wrist, she would have clutched this maddening woman by the hair, dragged her towards the door, and was lucky to get her back into the cab without a public scene, for she was beside herself with rage. In a cold way I felt pretty furious myself, Watson, for there was something indescribably annoying in the calm aloofness and supreme self-complacence of the woman whom we were trying to save. Now, once again, you know exactly how we stand, and it is clear that I must plan some fresh opening move, for this gambit won't work. I'll keep in touch with you, Watson, for it is more than likely that you will have your part to play, although it is just possible that the next move may lie with them rather than with us. And it did. Their blow fell, or his blow rather, for never could I believe that the lady was privy to it. I think I could show the very paving stone upon which I stood when my eyes fell upon the placard, and a pang of horror passed through my very soul. It was between the Grand Hotel and Charing Cross Station, where a one-legged news-vendor displayed his evening papers. The date was just 2 days after his last conversation. There, black upon yellow, was a terrible news sheet. Murderous attack upon Sherlock Holmes. I think I stood stunned for some moments. Then I have a confused recollection of snatching at the paper, and remonstrance of the man whom I had not paid, and finally of standing in the doorway of a chemist's shop when I turned up that fateful paragraph. This was how it ran. We learn with regret that Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the well-known private detective, was the victim this morning of a murderous assault which has left him in a precarious position. There are no exact details on hand, but the event seems to be occurred about 12 o'clock in Regent Street, outside the Café Royal. The attack was made by 2 men armed with sticks, and Mr. Holmes was beaten about the head and body, receiving injuries which the doctors describe as most serious. He was carried to Charing Cross Hospital, and afterwards insisted upon being taken to his rooms in Baker Street. The miscreants who attacked him appear to have been respectably dressed men, who escaped from the bystanders by passing through the Café Royal and out into the Blackstone Street behind it. No doubt they belonged to that criminal fraternity which has so often had occasion to bewail the activity and ingenuity of the injured man. I need not say that my eyes had hardly glanced over the paragraph before I sprang into a hansom and was on my way to Baker Street. I found Sir Leslie Oxford, the famous surgeon, in the hall, and his brougham waiting at the curb. "No immediate danger," was his report. 2 lacerated scalp wounds and some considerable bruises. Several stitches have been necessary. Morphine has been injected, and quiet is essential. But an interview of a few minutes would not be absolutely forbidden. With this permission, I stole into the darkened room. The sufferer was wide awake, and I heard my name in a hoarse whisper. The blind was 3/4 down, but one ray of sunlight slanted through and struck the bandaged head of the injured man. A crimson patch was soaked through the white linen compress. I sat beside him and bent my head. "All right, Watson. Don't look so scared," he muttered in a very weak voice. "It's not as bad as it seems." "Thank God for that. I'm a bit of a single-stick expert, you know. I took most of them on my guard. It was the second man that was too much for me." "What can I do, Holmes? Of course, it was that damned fellow who set them on. I'll go and thrash the hide off of him if you give me the word." "Good old Watson. No, you can do nothing there unless the police lay their hands upon the men. But their getaway had little been well prepared. We may be sure of it. Wait a little. I have my plans. The first thing is to exaggerate my injuries. They'll come to you for the news. Put it on thick, Watson. Luckily, if I live the week out, concussion, delirium, whatever you like, you can't overdo it. But Sir Leslie Oakshott. Oh, he's all right. He shall see the worst side of me. I'll look after that. Anything else? Yes. Tell Shinwell Johnson to get that girl out of the way. Those beauties will be after her now. They know, of course, that she was in this case with me. If they dared to do to me, it's not likely they will neglect her. That is urgent. Do it tonight. I'll go now. Anything else? Put my pipe on the table and the tobacco slipper, right? Come in each morning and we will plan our campaign. I arranged with Johnson that evening to take Miss Winter to a quiet suburb and see that she lay low until danger was past. For 6 days the public were under the impression that Holmes was at the door of death. The bulletins were very grave, and there were sinister paragraphs in the papers. My continual visits assured me that it was not so bad as that. His wiry constitution and his determined will were working wonders. He was recovering fast, and I had suspicions at times that he was really finding himself rather faster than he intended, even to me. There was a curious, secretive streak in man which led me to many dramatic effects, but left even his closest friend guessing as to what his exact plans might be. He pushed to an extreme the axiom that the only safe plotter was he who plotted alone. I was nearer him than anyone else, and yet I was always conscious of the gap between us. On the 7th day the stitches were taken out, in spite of which there was a report of Illustrious in the evening papers. The same evening papers had an announcement which I had bound, sick or well, to carry to my friend. It was simply that among the passengers of the Colonel boat Ruritania, starting from Liverpool on Friday, was the Baron Adalbert Crunner, who had some important financial business to settle in the States before his impending wedding to Miss Violet de Merville, the only daughter of etc., etc. Holmes listened to the news with a cold, concentrated look at his pale face, which told me that it hit him hard. Friday, he cried. Only 3 clear days. I believe the rascal wants to put himself out of danger's way. But he won't, Watson. By the Lord Harry, he won't. Now, Watson, I want you to do something for me. I am here to be used, Holmes. Oh, then. Spend the next 24 hours in intensive study of Chinese pottery. He gave no explanations, and I asked for none. By long experience I had learned that the wisdom of obedience. But when I had left his room I walked down Baker Street, revolving in my head how on earth I was to carry out so strange an order. Finally I drove to the London Library in St. James Square, put the matter to my friend Lomax, the sub-librarian, and departed to my rooms with a godly volume under my arm. It was said that the barrister who crams up a case with such care that he can examine an expert witness upon a Monday has forgotten all his forced knowledge before the Saturday. Certainly I should not like to pose as an authority upon ceramics, and yet all that evening and all that night, with a short interval of rest, and all the next morning I was sucking in the knowledge and committing names to memory. There I learned of the hallmarks of the great artist-decorators, of the mysteries Selco dates, and the marks of the Hung Wu and the beauties of the Young Lo, the writings of the Tang Ying, and the glories of the primitive period of the Sung and of the Yuan. I was charged with all that information when I called upon Holmes next evening. He was out of bed now, though you would not have guessed it from the published reports, and he sat with his much bandaged head resting upon his hand in the depth of his favourite armchair. "Why, Holmes," I said, "if you believe the papers, you're dying." "That," he said, "is the very impression which I intend to convey. And now, Watson, Have you learned your lessons? At least I've tried to. Good. You could keep up an intelligent conversation on the subject. I believe I could. Then hand me that little box from the mantelpiece. He opened the lid and took the small object, most carefully wrapped in some fine Eastern silk. Then he unfolded and disclosed a little saucer of the most beautiful deep blue color. It needs careful handling, Watson. This is the real eggshell pottery of the Ming Dynasty. No finer piece has ever passed through Christie's. A complete set of this would be worth a king's ransom. In fact, it is doubtful if there is a complete set outside the imperial palace of Peking. The sight of this would drive a real connoisseur wild. And what am I to do with it? Holmes handed me a card upon which is printed, Dr. Hill Barton, 369 Half Moon Street. That is the name for the evening, Watson. You will call upon Baron Gruner. I know something of his habits, and at 8:30 he will probably be disengaged. A note will tell him in advance that you are about to call, and you will say that you are bringing him a specimen of absolutely unique set of Ming china. You may as well be a medical man, since that is the part in which you play without duplicity. You are a collector. This set has come your way, and you have heard of Baron's interest in the subject, and you're not averse to selling it at a price. What price? Well asked, Watson. You would certainly fall down badly if you did not know the value of your own wares. This saucer was got to me by Sir James, and comes, I understand, from the collection of his clients. You will not exaggerate if you say that it could hardly be matched in the world. I could perhaps suggest that the set would be valued by an expert. Excellent, Watson. You scintillate today. Suggest Christie or Sotheby. Your delicacy prevents you putting a price on yourself. But if you won't see me... Oh, yes, he will see you. He has the collection mania in its most acute form, and especially on this subject, on which he is the acknowledged authority. Sit down, Watson, and I will dictate the letter. No answer needed. You will merely say that you are coming and why. It was an admirable document, short, courteous, and stimulating to the curiosity of the connoisseur. A direct messenger was duly dispatched with it. On the same evening, with the precious saucer in my hand, and the card of Dr. Hill Barton in my pocket, I set off on my own adventure. The beautiful house and grounds indicated that Baron Gruner was, as Sir James had said, a man of considerable wealth. A long, winding drive with banks of rare shrubs on either side opened out into a great gravelled square adorned with statues. The place had been built by a South African gold king in the days of the Great Boom, and the long, low house with the turrets at the corners, though an architectural nightmare, was imposing in its size and solidarity. A butler who will have adorned the bench of bishops showed me in, and handed me over to a plush-clad footman, who ushered me into the Baron's presence. He was standing at an open front of the great case which stood between the windows, and which contained part of his Chinese collection. He turned as I entered, with a small brown vase in his hand. "Pray sit down, Doctor," he said. "I was looking over my own treasures and wondering whether I could really afford to add to them. This little Tang specimen, which dates from the 7th century, would probably interest you. I am sure you have never seen finer workmanship or richer glaze. Have you a Ming saucer with you, which you spoke?" I carefully unpacked it and handed it to him. He seated himself at his desk and pulled over a lamp, for it was growing dark, and to set himself to examine it. As he did so, the yellow light beat upon his own features. I was able to study them at my ease. He was certainly a remarkably handsome man. His European reputation for beauty was well deserved. In figure he was not more than of middle size, but it was built upon graceful and active lines. His face was swarthy, almost oriental, with large, dark, languorous eyes, which might easily hold an irresistible fascination for women. His hair and mustache were raven black, his latter short, pointed, and carefully waxed. His features were regular and pleasing, save only his straight, thin-lipped mouth. If I ever saw a murderer's mouth, it was there, a cruel, hard gash in the face, compressed, inexorable, and terrible. He was ill-advised to train his mustache away from it, for it was nature's danger signal, set as a warning to his victims. His voice was engaging and his manners perfect. In age I should have put him a little over 30, though his record afterwards showed that he was 42. Very fine indeed, he said at last. And you say you have a set of 6 to correspond. What puzzles me is that I should not have heard of such magnificent specimens. I only know of one in England to match this, and it is certainly not likely to be in the market. Would it be indiscreet if I were to ask you, Dr. Bartonhill, how you obtained this? Does it really matter? I asked, as with a careless an air as I could muster. You can see that the piece is genuine, and as to the value, I'm content to take an expert's valuation. Very mysterious, said he, with a quick, suspicious flash of his dark eyes. In dealing with objects of such value, one naturally wishes to know all about the transaction. That the piece is genuine for certain, I have no doubts at all about that, but suppose I'm bound to take every possibility into account, that it should prove afterwards that you had no right to sell. I would guarantee you against any claim of the sort. That, of course, would open up the question as to what your guarantee was worth. My bankers would answer that. Quite so. And yet the whole transaction strikes me as rather unusual. You can do business or not, said I, with indifference. I have given you the first offer, as I understood that you were quite a connoisseur. I shall have no difficulty in other quarters. Who told you I was a connoisseur? I was aware that you had written a book upon the subject. Have you read the book? No? Dear me, this becomes more and more difficult for me to understand. You're a connoisseur and a collector with a very valuable piece in your collection, and yet you have never troubled to consult the one book which would have told you the real meaning and value of what you held. How do you explain that? I'm a very busy man. I'm a doctor in practice. That is no answer. If a man has a hobby, he follows it up, whether his other pursuits may be. You said in your note that you were a connoisseur. So I am? Might I ask you a few questions to test you? I'm obliged to tell you, Doctor, if you are indeed a doctor, that the incident becomes more and more suspicious. I should ask you what you know of the Emperor Shomu, and how do you associate him with the Sososhin in Nara? Dear me, does that puzzle you? Tell me a little bit about Northern Wei Dynasty, and its place in the history of ceramics. I sprang from my chair in simulated anger. This is intolerable, sir, said I. I am here to do you a favor, not to be examined as if I were a schoolboy. My knowledge on the subjects may be second only to your own, but I am certainly not answer the questions which have been put in so offensive a way. He looked at me steadily. The languor had gone from his eyes, and he suddenly glared. There was a gleam of teeth from those cruel lips. What is this game? Are you here as a spy? You are one of an emissary from Holmes. This is a trick that you are playing upon me. This fellow is dying, I hear, so he sends his tools to keep watch upon me. I've made your way in here without leave, and by God, you may find it harder to get out than it is to get in. He had sprung to his feet, and I stepped back, bracing myself for an attack. For the man was beside himself with rage. He may have suspected me from the first. Certainly this cross-examination has shown him the truth. But it was clear that I could not hope to deceive him. He dived his hand into the side drawer and rummaged furiously. Then something struck upon his ear, for he stood listening intently. "Ah!" he cried, "ah!" and dashed from the room behind him. 2 steps took me to the open door, and my mind will ever carry a clear picture of the scene within. The window leading out to the garden was wide open. Beside it, looking like some terrible ghost, his head girthed in bloody bandages, his face drawn and white, stood Sherlock Holmes. The next instant he was through a gap, and I heard the crash of his body among the laurel bushes outside. With a howl of rage, the master of the house rushed after him to the open window. And then it was done in an instant, and I yet clearly saw it. An arm, a woman's arm, shot out from among the leaves, which same instant the Baron uttered a horrible cry, a yell which will always ring in my memory. He clapped his 2 hands in his face and rushed around the room, beating his head horribly against the walls. Then he fell upon the carpet, rolling and writhing, while scream after scream resounded through the halls. "Water! For God's sake, water!" was his cry. I seized the carafe from his side table and rushed to his aid. At the same moment the butler and several footmen ran into the hall. I remember that one of them fainted as he knelt by the injured man and turned that awful face to the light of the lamp. The vitriol was eating at it everywhere, dripping from the ears to the chin. The eye was already white and glazed. The red was red and inflamed. The features which I had admired a few moments ago had now like some beautiful painting in which an artist has passed a wet, foul sponge. They were blurred, discolored, inhuman, terrible. In a few words I explained exactly what had occurred, so far as the vitriol attack was concerned. Some had climbed through the window and others had rushed out on the lawn, but it was dark and it had begun to rain. Between his screams the victim raged and raved against the ravenger. "It was that hell-cat, Kitty Winter," he cried. "Oh, the she-devil! She shall pay for it! Shall pay for it! Oh, God in heaven, this pain is more than I can bear!" I bathed his face in oil, put cotton wadding on the raw surfaces, and administered a hypodermic of morphia. All suspicion of me had passed from his mind in the presence of his shock, and he clung to my hands as if I might have the power yet to even clear those dead fish eyes which gazed up at me. I could have wept over the ruin had I not remembered the very vile life which had led up to the hideous change. It was loathsome to feel the pawing of his burning hands, and I was relieved when his family surgeon, closely followed by a specialist, came to relieve me of my charge. The inspector of police had also arrived, and to him I handed my real card. It would have been useless as well as foolish to do otherwise, for I was nearly as well known by the sight of his yard as Holmes himself. Then left to the house of gloom and terror. Within an hour I was at Baker Street. Holmes was seated in his familiar chair, looking very pale and exhausted. Apart from his injuries, even his iron nerves had been shocked by the events of the evening, and he listened with horror to my account of the Baron's transformation. "Wages of sin, Watson, the wages of sin," said he. "Sooner or later it always comes home. God knows there was a sin enough." He added, taking up a brown volume from the table. "Here's the book the woman talked of. If this will not break off his marriage, nothing ever could. But it will, Watson. It must. No self-respecting woman can stand it." Thank you. Is it his love diary? Or his lust diary? Call it what you will. The moment the woman told us of it, I realized what a tremendous weapon there was here, if we could but lay our hands on it. I said nothing at the time to indicate my thoughts, for this woman might have given it away. But I brooded over it. Then this assault upon me gave me the chance of letting the Baron think that no precautions need to be taken against me. That was all to the good. I would have waited a little longer, but his visit to America forced my hand. He would never have left so compromising a document behind him. Therefore, we had to act at once. Burglary at night is impossible. He takes precautions. But there was a chance in the evening if I could only be sure that his attention was engaged. That was where you and your blue saucer came in. But I had to be sure of the position of the book, and as I knew I had only a few moments in which to act, for my time was limited by your knowledge of Chinese pottery. Therefore I gathered the girl up at the last moment. How could I guess that the little packet that she carried so carefully under her cloak? I thought that she might come altogether on my business, but it seems she had some of her own. He had guessed I came from you. I feared he would, but you held him in play just long enough for me to get the book, though long enough for an unobserved escape. Sir James, I'm very glad you have come. Our courtly friend had appeared to answer to a previous summons. He listened with the deepest attention to Holmes's account of what had occurred. You have done wonders, wonders, he cried when he had heard the narrative. But if these injuries are as terrible as Dr. Watson describes, then surely our purpose of thwarting the marriage is sufficiently gained without the use of the horrible book. Holmes shook his head. Women of the Merville type do not act like that. She would love him the more as he was a disfigured martyr. No, it is his moral side, not his physical, which we must destroy. That book will bring her back to earth. I know of nothing else that could. It is in his own writing. She cannot get past it. Sir James carried away both it and the precious saucer. As I was myself overdue, I went down with him into the street. A brougham was waiting for him. He sprang in and gave a hurried order to the cocktailed coachman and drove swiftly away. He flung his overcoat out the window to cover the armorial bearings of the panel, but I had seen them in the glare of our fanlight nonetheless. I gasped with surprise. Then I turned back and ascended the stairs to Holmes. I found out who our client is, I cried, bursting with my great news. Why, Holmes, it was a loyal friend and a chivalrous gentleman, said Holmes, raising up a restraining hand. Let that now and forever be enough for us. I do not know how the incriminating book was used. Sir James may have managed it, or it was probable that so delicate a task was entrusted to the young lady's father. The effect, at any rate, was all that could be desired. 3 days later appeared a paragraph in the Morning Post to say that the marriage between Baron Adalbert Grunner and Miss Violet de Merville would not take place. The same paper had the first police court hearing of the proceedings against Miss Kitty Winger on the grave charge of vitriol throwing. Such extenuating circumstances came out in the trial that the sentence, as will be remembered, was the lowest that the possible for such an offence. Sherlock Holmes was threatened with prosecution of burglary, but when the object is good and the client is sufficiently illustrious, even the rigid British law becomes human and elastic. My friend has not yet stood on the dock. Thank you for that stretch and hydrate. I don't know if the ear scritches worked or not. I wasn't looking. They should have worked. Oh, it's only set on 3 seconds. Oops, my bad. Let me fix that. Okay, that I like ear scritches. There we go. Yep. That first story almost took an hour and a half. Well, it wasn't just the first story, though. It was the first story in the prologue. And that was also 29 pages long. So I guess I can probably do a second one. Oh, there's enough stretch because I'm sore. And thank you for the raid. This? No. Oh, cool. When your messages popped up. That's awesome. And thank you for the follow, just the guy. Oh, I need a drink. Ooh. It does seem so interesting to get back into Watson's voice after having 2 weeks off of it. I really wish I could get my model to react a little bit better, though. Okay, let's do a second story. Our second story for the evening. Oh, this is going to be interesting. It's actually written from Holmes' perspective. That will make things considerably easier, I suppose. But, oh, crap. Restore the page. No! Freaking finger. Oh well. So, our next story. The Adventure of the Blanched Soldier. The idea of my friend Watson, though limited, are exceedingly pertinacious. For a long time he has worried me to write an experience of my own. Perhaps I have rather invited this persecution, since I have often had occasion to point out to him how superficial are his own accounts, and to accuse him of pandering to popular taste instead of confining himself rigidly to facts and figures. Charge yourself, Holmes, he has retorted, and I am compelled to admit that, having taken my pen in my hand, I do begin to realize that the matter must be presented in such a way as it may interest the reader. The following case can hardly fail to do so, as it is among the strangest happenings in my collection, although it chanced that Watson had no note of it in his collection. Speaking of my old friend and biographer, I would take this opportunity to remark that if I burden myself with his companionship in various little inquiries, it is not done out of sentiment or caprice, but it is that Watson has some remarkable characteristics of his own, to which in his modesty he has given small attention amid his exaggerated estimates of my own performances. A confederate who foresees your conclusions and course of action is always dangerous, but one to whom each development comes as a perpetual surprise, and to whom the future is always a closed book, is indeed an ideal helpmate. I find from my notebook that it was in the January of 1903, just after the conclusion of the Boer War, that I had my visit from Mr. James M. Dodd, a big, fresh, sunburned, upstanding Briton. The good Watson had at the time deserted me for a wife, the only selfish action which I can recall on our occasion. I was alone. It is my habit to sit with my back to the window and to place my visitors in the opposite chair, where the light falls full upon them. Mr. James M. Dodd seemed somewhat at a loss how to begin the interview. I did not attempt to help him, for his silence gave me more time for observation. I have found it wise to impress clients with a sense of power, so I gave him some of my conclusions. From South Africa, sir, I perceive. Yes, sir, he answered with some surprise. Imperial Yeomancy, I fancy. Exactly. Middlesex Corp, no doubt. That is so, Mr. Holmes. You're a wizard. I smiled at his bewildered expression. When a gentleman of virile appearance appears in my room with such tan upon his face as the English sun could never give, and with his handkerchief in his sleeve instead of his pocket, it is not difficult to place him. You wear a short beard, which shows that you were not a regular. You have cut of a riding man. As to Middlesex, your card has already shown me that you're a stockbroker from Thorpe Mountain Streets. What other regiment would you join? You see everything. I see no more than you, but I have trained myself to notice what I see. However, Mr. Dodd, it was not to discuss the science of observation that you called upon me this morning. What has been happening in Tuxbury Old Park? Mr. Holmes! My dear sir, there is no mystery. Your letter came with that heading. And as you fixed this appointment in very pressing terms, that it was clear that something sudden and important had occurred. Yes, indeed, but the letter was written in the afternoon, and a good deal has happened since then. If Colonel Emsworth had not kicked me out... Kicked you out? Well, that was what it amounted to. He's a hard nail, this Colonel Emsworth. The greatest martinet in the army in his day, and it was a day of rough language, too. I couldn't have struck the colonel if it had been for Godfrey's sake. I lit my pipe and leaned back in my chair. Perhaps you will explain what you are talking about. My client grinned mischievously. I got into the way of supposing that you knew everything without being told, said he. But I will give you the facts, and I hope God that you will be able to tell me what they mean. I've been awake all night puzzling my brain, and the more I think, the more incredible it does become. When I joined up, it was January 1901, just 2 years ago. Young Godfrey Emsworth had joined the same squadron. He was Colonel Emsworth's only son, Emsworth the Crimean V.C., and he had been fighting blood in him, so it was no wonder he volunteered. There was not a finer lad in the regiment. We formed a friendship, the sort of friendship which can only be made when one's lives on the same side and shares the same joys and sorrows. He was my mate, and that always means a good deal in the army. We took the rough and the smooth together for a year of hard fighting, and then he was hit with a bullet from an elephant gun in the action of Diamond Hill out of Pretoria. I got one letter from the hospital at Cape Town and one from Southampton. Since then, not a word. Not one word, Mr. Holmes, for 6 months and more, and he was my closest pal. Well, when the war was over and we all got back, I wrote his father and asked where Godfrey was. No answer. I waited a bit, then I wrote again. This time I had a reply, short and gruff. Godfrey had gone on a voyage around the world, and it was not likely that he would ever be back within a year. And that was all. I wasn't satisfied, Mr. Holmes. The whole thing seemed to me so damned unnatural. He was a good lad, and he would not drop a pal like that. It was not like him. And then again, I happened to know that he was the heir of a lot of money, and also that his father and he did not always hit it off too well. The old man was sometimes a bully, and young Godfrey had too much of a spirit to stand it. No, I wasn't satisfied, and I determined that I would get to the root of the matter. It happened, however, that my own affairs needed a lot of straightening out. After 2 years' absence, and so it is only a week that I've been able to take up Godfrey's case again. But since I've taken it up, I mean to drop everything in order to see it through. Mr. James M. Dodd appeared to be the sort of person whom it would be better to have as a friend than as an enemy. His blue eyes were starred, his jaw square, and his hard set as he spoke. Well, what have you done? I asked. My first move was to get down to his home in Tuxbury Old Park, near Bedford, and to see for myself how the ground lay. I wrote to the mother, therefore I had had quite enough of the curmudgeon of a father, and I made a clean frontal attack. Godfrey was my chum. I had a great deal of interest in which I might tell her of our common experiences. I should be in the neighborhood. Would there be any objection, etc.? In reply, I had a quite amiable answer from her and an offer to put me up for the night. That was what took me down to Monday. Tuxbury Old Hall is inaccessible, 5 miles from anywhere. There was no trap at the station, so I had to walk, carrying my suitcase, and it was nearly dark before I arrived. It was a great wandering house, standing in a considerable park. I should judge it was all sorts of ages and styles, starting in the half-timbered Elizabethan foundation and ending in the Victorian portico. Inside it was all paneling and tapestry and half-effaced old pictures, a house of shadows and mystery. There was a butler, old Ralph, who seemed to be the same age as the house, and there was his wife, who might have been older. She had been Godfrey's nurse, and I heard him speak of her as second only to his mother in his affections. So I was drawn to her in spite of her queer appearance. The mother I liked also, a gentle little white mouse of a woman. It was only Colonel himself whom I barred. We had a bit of a barney right away, and I should have walked back to the station if I had not felt that it might be playing his game for me to do so. I was shown straight into his study, and there I found him, huge, bow-backed man with a smoky skin and a straggling gray beard, seated behind his littered desk. A red-veined nose jutted out like a vulture's beak, and two fierce gray eyes glared at me from under the tufted brows. I could understand why Godfrey seldom spoke of his father. "Well, sir," he said in a rasping voice, "I should be interested to know the real reasons for this visit." I answered that I had explained them in the letter to his wife. "Yes, yes, you said you had known Godfrey in Africa. We have, of course, only your word for that." "I have his letters in my pocket." "Kindly let me see them." He glanced at the two which I handed him, and then he tossed them back. "Well, what then?" he asked. "I was fond of your son Godfrey, sir. Many ties and memories united us. It is not unnatural that I should wonder his sudden silence and should wish to know what has become of him." "I have some recollection, sir, that I already corresponded with you and told you that he had become of him. He has gone upon a voyage around the world. His health was in poor after his African experiences, and both his mother and I were of the opinion that complete rest and change were needed. Kindly pass that explanation on to any other friends who may be interested in the matter." "Certainly," I answered. "Perhaps you would have the goodness to let me have the name of the steamer and the line by which he sailed, together with the date. I have no doubt that I should be able to get a letter through to him." My request seemed both to puzzle and infuriate my host. His great eyebrows came down over his eyes, and he tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. He looked up at last with the expression of one who has seen his adversary make a dangerous move in chess, and has decided how to meet it. "Many people, Mr. Dodd," he said, "would take offense at your infernal pertinacity and would think that this instance has reached the point of damned impertinence." "You must put it down, sir, to my real love for your son." "Exactly. I have already made every allowance upon that score. I must ask you, however, to drop these inquiries. Every family has its inner knowledge and its own motives, which cannot be made clear to outsiders, however well-intentioned. My wife is anxious to hear something of Godfrey's past which you are in position to tell her, but I would ask you to let the present and future alone. Such inquiries serve no useful purpose, sir, and place us in a delicate and difficult position." It came to a dead end, Mr. Holmes. There was no getting past it. I could only pretend to accept the situation and register a vow inwardly that I would never rest until my friend's fate had been cleared up. It was a dull evening. We dined quietly, the three of us, in a gloomy, faded old room. The lady questioned me eagerly about her son, but the old man seemed morose and depressed. I was so bored by the whole proceeding that I made an excuse as soon as I could decently go and retired to my bedroom. It was a large bare room on the ground floor, as gloomy as the rest of the house. But after a year of sleeping on the veldt, Mr. Holmes, one is not too particular about one's quarters. I opened the curtains and looked out into the garden, remarking that it was a fine night with a bright half moon. And then I sat down by the roaring fire with the lamp on the table beside me, and endeavored to distract my mind with a novel. I was interrupted, however, by Ralph, the old butler, who came in with a fresh supply of coals. "I thought you might run short in the night time, sir. Is it bitter weather and these rooms are cold?" He hesitated before leaving the room, and when I looked round he was standing facing me with a wistful look upon his wrinkled face. "Beg your pardon, sir, but I could not help but hearing what you said of young Master Godfrey at dinner. You know, sir, that my wife nursed him, and so I may say that I am foster father. It's natural we should take an interest. And you say he carried himself well, sir?" "There was no braver man in the regiment. He pulled me out once from under the rifles of the Boers, and maybe I should not be here." The old butler rubbed his skinny hands. "Yes, sir, yes, that is Master Godfrey all over. He was always courageous. There's not a tree in the park, sir, that he has not climbed. Nothing would stop him. He was a fine boy, and oh, sir, he was a fine man." I sprang to my feet. "Look here," I cried. "You say he was. You speak as if he were dead. What is all this mystery? What has become of Godfrey Amsworth?" I gripped the old man by the shoulder, but he shrank away. "I don't know what you mean, but, sir. Ask the master about Master Godfrey. He knows. It is not for me to interfere." He was leaving the room, but I held his arm. "Listen," I said. "You're going to answer one question before I leave if I have told you all night. Is Godfrey dead?" He could not face my eyes. He was a man hypnotized. The answer was dragged from his lips. It was a terrible, an unexpected one. "I wish to God that he was," he cried, and tearing himself free, he dashed from the room. You will think, Mr. Holmes, that I returned to my chair in no happy state of mind. The old man's words seemed to bear on me only one interpretation. Clearly, my poor friend had become in some criminal, or at least disreputable transaction which shuts the family honor. That stern old man had sent his son away and hidden him from the world lest some scandal come to light. Godfrey was a reckless fellow, and he was easily influenced by those around him. No doubt he had followed into bad hands and been misled to his ruin. It was a piteous business, if it was indeed so, but even now it was my duty to hunt him out and to see if I could aid him. I was anxiously pondering the matter when I looked up, and there was Godfrey Amsworth standing before me. My client paused, as one in deep emotion. "Pray continue," I said. "Your problem presents some very unusual features." "He was outside the window, Mr. Holmes, with his face pressed against the glass. I've told you that I looked out that night. When I did so, I left the curtains partly open. His figure was framed in the gap. The window came down to the ground, and I could see his whole length, but it was his face that was gazed. It was deadly pale. Never have I seen a man so white. I reckon ghosts may look like that, but his eyes met mine, and they were eyes of a living man. He sprang back when he saw that I looked at him, and he vanished into the darkness." There was something shocking about the man, Mr. Holmes. It wasn't merely a ghastly face glimmering as white as cheese in the darkness. It was more subtle than that, something slinking, something furtive, something guilty, something very unlike the frank, manly lad I had known. I left a feeling of horror in my mind. But when a man has been soldiering for a year or two with his brother bearer as a playmate, he keeps his nerve and acts quickly. Godfrey had hardly vanished before I was at the window. There was an awkward catch, and I was a little time before I could throw it up. Then I nipped through the night and ran down the garden path that I thought he might have taken. It was a long path and the light was not very good, but it seemed to me something was moving ahead of me. I ran on and called his name, but it was no use. And when I got to the end of the path, there were several others branching in different directions to various outhouses. I stood hesitating, and as I did so I heard the distinct sound of a door closing. It was not behind me in the house, but ahead of me, somewhere in the darkness. That was enough, Mr. Holmes, to assure me that I had seen was not a vision. Godfrey had run away from me, and he had shut a door behind him. Of that I was certain. There was nothing more I could do, and I spent an uneasy night turning the matter over in my mind and trying to find some theory which would cover the facts. Next day I found the colonel rather more conciliatory, and his wife had remarked that there were some places of interest in the neighborhood. It gave me an opening to ask whether my presence one more night would incommode them. A somewhat grudging acquiescence from the old man gave me a clear day to which I'd make my observations. I was already perfectly convinced that Godfrey was hiding somewhere near, but where and why remained to be solved. The house was so large and so rambling that a regiment might be hid away in it, and no one the wiser. If a secret lay there, it was difficult for me to penetrate it. But the door which I had heard closed was certainly not in the house. I must explore the garden and see what I could find. There was no difficulty in the way, and from the old people were busy in their old fashion and left me to my own devices. There were several small outhouses, but at the end of the garden there was a detached building of some size, large enough for a gardener's or gamekeeper's residence. Could this be the place where the sounds of the shutting door had come? I approached it in a careless fashion, as though I were strolling aimlessly in the grounds, and as I did so, a small, brisk, bearded man with a black cloak and bowler hat, not at all a gardener type, came out the door. To my surprise, he locked it after him and put the key in his pocket. Then he looked at me and some surprise came to his face. "Are you a visitor here?" he asked. I explained that I was a friend of Godfrey's. "What a pity he should be away on his travels, for he would have so liked to see me," I continued. "Quite so, exactly," said he, with a rather guilty air. "No doubt you'll renew your visits at some more propitious time." It passed on, but when I turned I observed that he was standing watching me, half concealed by the laurels at the far end of the garden. I had a good look at the little house as I passed it, but the windows were all heavily curtained, and so far as I could see it was empty. I might spoil my own game, but even be ordered off the premises if I were too audacious, for I was still conscious that I was being watched. Therefore I strolled back to the house and waited for night before I went out into my inquiry. When all was dark, I slipped out my window and made my way silently as possible to the mysterious lodge. I've said that it was heavily curtained, but now I found that the windows were shuttered as well. Some light, however, was breaking through one of them, so I concentrated my attention upon this. I was in luck, for the curtain had not been quite closed, and there was a crack in the shutter that I could see enough of the inside of the room. It was a cheery place enough, a bright lamp and a blazing fire. Opposite to me was seated a little man who I had seen in the morning. He was smoking a pipe and reading a paper. "What paper?" I asked. My client seemed annoyed at the interruption of his narrative. "Can it matter?" I asked. "It is most essential." I really took no notice. "Possibly you observed whether it was broad-leaved paper, or that it was a smaller type of which one associates with weeklies." "Now that you mention it, it was not large. It might have been the Spectator. However, I had little thought to spare on such details, for the second man was seated with his back to the window, and I could swear that the second man was Godfrey. I could not see his face, but I knew the familiar slope of his shoulders. He was leaning upon his elbow in an attitude of great melancholy, and his body turned towards the fire. I was hesitating as to what I should do, and there was a sharp tap on my shoulder, and there was Colonel Emsworth beside me. "This way, sir," as he said in a low voice. We walked in silence to the house, and I followed him into my own bedroom. He had picked up a timetable in the hall. "There's a train to London at 8:30, he said. "The trap will be here at the door at 8. He was white with rage, and indeed I felt myself in so difficult a position that I could only stammer out a few incorrigible apologies, which I had tried to excuse myself for urging my anxiety for my friend. "The matter will not bear discussion," he said abruptly. "You have made the most damnable intrusion into the privacy of our family. You are here as a guest, and you have become a spy. I have nothing more to say, sir, save that I have no wish to ever see you again." At last I lost my temper, Mr. Holmes, and I spoke with some warmth. "I have seen your son, and I am convinced that for some reason of your own you are concealing him from the world. I have no idea what your motives are cutting him off for this fashion, but I'm sure that he is no longer a free agent. I warn you, Colonel Emsworth, that until I am assured as to the safety and well-being of my friend, I shall never desist in my efforts to get to the bottom of this mystery, and I shall certainly not allow myself to be intimidated by anything which you may say or do." The old fellow looked diabolical, and I really thought he was about to attack me. I've said that he was a gaunt, fierce old giant, and though I am no weakling, I might have been hurt to hold my own against him. However, after a long glare of rage, he turned upon his heel and walked out of the room. For my part, I took the appointed train in the morning, with full intention of coming straight to you and asking for your advice and assistance at the appointment for which I had already written. Such was the problem in which my visitor laid before me. It presented, as the astute reader will have already perceived, a few difficulties in its solution, for a very limited choice of alternatives must get to the root of the matter. Still, elementary as it was, there were few points of interest and novelty about it that may excuse my placing it upon record. I now proceed, using my familiar methods of logical analysis, to narrow down the possible solutions. The servants asked, "How many were there in the house?" To the best of my belief, there were only the old butler and his wife. They seemed to live in the simplest fashion. There was no servant, then, in the detached house? None unless the little man with a beard acted as such. He seemed, however, to be quite a superior person. That seems very suggestive. Had you any indication that the food was conveyed from one house to the other? Now that you mention it, I did see old Ralph carrying a basket down the garden walk and going in the direction of this house. The idea of food did not occur to me at the moment. Did you make any local inquiries? Yes, I did. I spoke to the station master and also to the innkeeper of the village. I simply asked if they knew anything of my old comrade Godfrey Emsworth. Both of them assured me that he had gone on a voyage around the world. He had come home and then had almost at once started off again. Their story was evidently universally accepted. You said nothing of your suspicions. Nothing. That was very wise. The matter should certainly be inquired into. I will go back with you to Tewkesbury Old Park. Today? It happened that at the moment I was clearing up a case which my friend Watson had described as that of the Abbey School, in which the Duke of Greymeister was so deeply involved. I had also commissioned the Sultan of Turkey, which called for immediate action, as political consequences of the gravest kind might arise if I neglect. Therefore, it was not until the beginning of the next week, as my diary records, that I was able to start forth on my mission to Bedfordshire in the company of Mr. James M. Dodd. As we drove to Euston, picked up a grave and taciturn gentleman of iron-grey aspect, with whom I had made the necessary arrangements. "This is an old friend," I said to Dodd. "It is possible that his presence may be entirely unnecessary, and on the other hand it may be essential. It is not necessary at the present stage to go further into the matter." The narratives of Watson have accustomed the reader, no doubt, to the fact that I do not waste words or disclose any thoughts while the case is actually under consideration. Dodd seemed surprised, but nothing more was said, and the three of us continued our journey together. In the train, I asked Dodd one more question which I wished our companion to hear. "You say that you saw your friend's face quite clearly in the window, so clearly that you are sure of his identity." "I have no doubt about it whatsoever. His nose was pressed against the glass, and the lamplight shone full upon him." "It could not have been someone resembling him." No, it was he." "But you say he was changed." "Only in color. His face was, how shall I describe it? It was a fish belly whiteness. It was bleached." "Was he equally pale all over?" "I think not. It was his brow which I saw so clearly as it was pressed against the window." "Did you call to him?" "I was too startled and horrified for the moment, and then I pursued him, but as I told you, but without result." My case was practically complete, and there was only one small incident needed to round it off. When, after a considerable drive, we arrived at the strange old rambling house which my client had described, it was Ralph, the elderly butler, who opened the door. I had requisitioned a carriage for the day, and had asked my elderly friend to remain within it, else we summon him. Ralph, a little wrinkled old fellow, was in conventional costume of black coat, salt and pepper trousers, and only one very curious variant. He wore brown leather gloves, which at sight of us he instantly shuffled off, laying them down on a hall table as we passed by. I have, as my friend Watson may have so remarked, an abnormally acute scent of senses. The faint but incisive scent was apparent. It seemed to center off the whole table. I turned and placed my hat there, knocked it off, stooped to pick it up, and contrived to bring my nose within a foot of the gloves. Yes, it was undoubtedly from them the curious tarry odor was oozing. I passed into the study with my case complete. Alas, that I should have to throw my hand when I was tell my own story. It was by concealing such links in the chain that Watson was enabled to produce the matriculous finalities. Colonel Emsworth was not in his room, and he came quickly enough on receipt of Ralph's message. We heard his quick, heavy step in the passage. The door was flung open, and he rushed in with a bristling beard and twisted features. A terrible as old man as I have ever seen. He held our cards in his hand, and he tore them up and stamped them on the fragments. "Have I told you not, you infernal busybody, that you were warned off the premises? Never dare to show your damned face here again. If you ever enter without my leave, I shall be within my rights if I use violence. I'll shoot you, sir. By God, I will. And as to you, sir," turning upon me, "I extend the same warning to you. I am familiar with your ignoble profession, but you must take your reputed talents to some other field. There is no opening for them here." "I cannot leave here," said my client firmly, "until I hear from Godfrey's own lips that he is under no restraint." Our involuntary guest rang the bell. "Ralph," he said, "come down, telephone down to the county police and ask the inspector to send up 2 constables. Tell him there are 2 burglars in the house." "One moment," said I. "You must be aware, Mr. Dodd, that Colonel Elmsworth is within his rights, and that we have no legal status within this house. On the other hand, he should recognize that your action is prompted entirely by solicitude of his son. I venture to hope that, if I were allowed to have 5 minutes' conversation with Colonel Elmsworth, I could certainly alter his view of the matter. "I am not so easily altered," said the old soldier. "Ralph, do what I have told you. What the devil are you waiting for? Ring up the police!" "Nothing of the sort," I said, putting my hand back at the door. "Any police interference would bring about the very catastrophe which you dread." I took out my notebook and scribbled one word on a loose sheet. "That," said I, as I handed it to Colonel Elmsworth, "is what has brought us here." He stared at the writing with a face from which every expression save amazement had vanished. "How do you know?" he asked, grasping as he's sitting down heavily in his chair. "It is my business to know things. That is my trade." He sat down in deep thought, his gaunt hand tugging at his straggling beard. Then he made a gesture of resignation. "Well, if you wish to see Godfrey, you shall. It is no doing of mine, and you have forced my hand. Ralph, tell Mr. Godfrey and Mr. Kent that in 5 minutes we shall be with them." At the end of the time, we passed down the garden path and found ourselves in front of the mystery house at the end. A small bearded man stood at the door with a look of considerable astonishment upon his face. "This is very sudden, Colonel Elmsworth," he said. "This will disarrange all our plans." "I can't help it, Mr. Kent. Our hands have been forced. Can Mr. Godfrey see us?" "Yes, he's waiting inside." He turned and led us into a large, plainly furnished front room. A man was standing with his back to the fire, and at the sight of him my client sprang forward with outstretched hand. "Why, Godfrey, my old man, this is fine!" But the other waved him back. Thank you. "Don't touch me, Jimmy. Keep your distance. Yes, you may well stare, but I don't quite look as smart Lance Corporal Emerson from B Squadron, do I?" His appearance was certainly extraordinary. One could see that he had indeed been a handsome man with clear-cut features, sunburned by an African sun, but mottled in patches over his face, darker surface, with curious whitish patches which had been bleached skin. "That is why I don't court visitors," he said. "I don't mind you, Jimmy, but I could have done without your friend. I suppose there is a good reason for it, but you have me at a disadvantage." "I wanted to be sure that all was well with you, Godfrey. I saw you last night, and you looked into my window. I could not let the matter rest until I cleared things up." "Old Ralph told me you were here, and I couldn't help but taking a peep at you. I hoped you would not have seen me, and I had to run to my burrow when I heard the window go up." "But what in heaven's name is the matter?" "Well, it's not a long story to tell," said he, lighting a cigarette. "You remember the morning fight in Buffalo Spruits outside Pretoria on the Eastern Railway line? You heard I was hit." "By heaven's name, what's... Well, yes, I heard that, but I never got the particulars." "There were three of us got separated from the others. It was broken country, you may remember. There was Simpson, the fellow we called Baldy Simpson, and Anderson and I. We were clearing Brother Boar when he lay low and got the three of us. The other two were killed. I got an elephant bullet through my shoulder. I stuck on my horse, however, and he galloped several miles before I fainted and rolled off the saddle. When I came to myself, it was nightfall, and I raised myself up, feeling very weak and ill. To my surprise, there was a house close to me, a fairly large house with a broad stoop and many windows. It was deadly cold. You remember the kind of numb cold we used to have come in the evening? Deadly, sickening sort of cold. Very different from a crisp, healthy frost. Well, I was chilled to the bone, and my only hope seemed to lie in reaching that house. I staggered to my feet and dragged myself along, hardly conscious of what I did. I have a dim memory of slowly ascending the steps and entering a wide-open door, passing into a large room which contained several beds, and throwing myself down with a gasp of satisfaction onto one of them. It was unmade, but that troubled me not. I drew the clothes over my shivering body, and in a moment I was in deep sleep. It was morning when I wakened, and it seemed to me that instead of coming out into the world of sanitary, I had emerged into some extraordinary nightmare. The African sun flooded through the big curtainless windows, and every detail of the great, bare, whitewashed dormitory stood out hard and clear. In front of me was standing a small, dwarf-like man with a huge, bulbous head who was jabbering excitedly in Dutch, waving two horrible hands which looked like round sponges. Behind him stood a group of people who seemed to be intensely amused by the situation, but a chill came over me when I looked at them. Not one of them was a normal human being. Every one was twisted or swollen or disfigured in some strange way. The laughter of these strange monstrosities was a dreadful thing to hear. It seemed that none of them could speak English, but the situation wanted clearing up, for the creature with the big head was growing furiously angry, and, uttering wild beast cries, he had laid his deformed hands upon me and dragged me out of the bed, regardless of how fresh flow of blood from my wound. The little monster was strong as a bull, and I don't know how he might have done to me had he not notably man who was clearly authority been attracted to the room by the hubbub. He said a few stern words in Dutch to my prosecutor to shrink away. Then he turned upon me, gazing at me in utmost amazement. "How in the world did you come here?" he asked in amazement. "Wait a bit, I see that you're tired out and that wounded shoulder of yours wants looking after. I'm a doctor and I'll soon have you tied up, but man alive, you are in far greater danger here than you ever were in the battlefield. You are in a leper hospital, and you just slept in a leper's bed." Need I tell you more, Jimmy? It seems that in the view of the approaching battle, all these poor creatures had been evacuated the day before. Then, as the British advanced, they had been brought back to this, their medical superintendent, who assured me that, though he believed he was immune to the disease, he would nonetheless never have dared to do what I had done. He put me in a private room, treated me kindly, and within a week or so I was removed to the General Hospital in Pretoria. So, there you have my tragedy. I hoped against hope, but it was not until I'd reached home that the terrible signs, which you see upon my face, told me that I had not escaped. What was I to do? I was in this lonely house. We had two servants whom could utterly trust. There was this house where I could live. Under pledge of secrecy, Mr. Kent, who was a surgeon, was prepared to stay with me. He seemed simple enough on those lines. The alternative was a dreadful one, segregation for life among strangers with never a hope of release. But absolute secrecy was necessary, or even in this quiet countryside there would be an outcry, and I should have been dragged to a horrible doom. Even you, Jimmy, even you would be kept in the dark. When my father was relented, I cannot imagine. Colonel Emsworth pointed to me. "This was the gentleman who forced my hand." He unfolded the scrap of paper on which I had written the word leprosy. It seemed to me that if he knew so much, that it was safer that he should know all. And so it was, I said. Who knows what good may come of it? I understand that only Mr. Kent has seen the patient. May I ask, sir, if you are an authority in such complaints, which are, as I understood, tropical or semi-tropical by nature? I have the ordinary knowledge of an educated medical man, he observed with some stiffness. I have no doubt, sir, that you are fully competent, but I am sure that you will agree that in such a case a second opinion is valuable. You have avoided this, I understand, for fear the pressure would be put upon you to segregate the patients. That is so, said Colonel Emsworth. I foresaw this situation, I explained, and I have brought with me a friend whose discretion may be absolutely trusted. I was once able to do him a professional service, and he is ready to advise as a friend rather than as a specialist. His name is Sir James Saunders. The prospect of an interview with Lord Roberts would not have excited greater wonder and pleasure in a roused subaltern than was now reflected upon the face of Mr. Kent. I shall be indeed be proud, he murmured. Then I will ask Sir James to step this way. He is at present in the carriage outside the door. Meanwhile, Colonel Emsworth, we may perhaps assemble in your study, where I could give the necessary explanations. And here it is that I miss my Watson. By cunning questions and ejaculations of wonder could alleviate my simple art, which is but systemized common sense, into a prodigy. When I tell my own story, I have no such aid, and yet I will give my process of thought even as I gave it to my small audience, which included Godfrey's mother in the study of Colonel Emsworth. That process, said I, starts upon the supposition that when you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It may well be that several explanations remain, in which cases some tries test after test until one or another of them is convincing amount of support. We will now apply this principle to the case in point. As it was first presented to me, there were three possible explanations for the seclusion or incarceration of this gentleman in an outhouse of his father's mansion. There was the explanation that he was in hiding for a crime, or that he was mad and they wished to avoid the asylum, or that he has some disease which caused his segmentation. I could think of no other adequate solutions than these had to be sifted and balanced between them amongst each other. The criminal solution would not bear inspection. No unsolved crime had been reported from that district. I was sure of that. If there were a crime not yet discovered, then clearly it would be to the interest of the family to get rid of the delinquent and send him abroad rather than keep him concealed at home. I could see no explanation for such a line of conduct. Insanity was more plausible. The presence of a second person in the outhouse suggested a keeper. That fact, his locked door when he came, strengthened the supposition and gave the idea of constraint. On the other hand, this constraint could not be severe, or the young man would not be loose and come down here to have a look at his friend. You'll remember, Mr. Dodd, that I felt round the points asking you, for example, about the paper which Mr. Kent was reading. Had it been the Lancet or the British Medical Journal, it would have helped me. It is not illegal, however, to keep a lunatic upon private premises so long as there are a qualified person in attendance, and that the authorities have been duly noted. Why, then, all the desperate desire for secrecy? Once again, I could not get the theory to fit the facts. There remained the third possibility, to which, rare and unlikely as it was, everything seemed to fit. Leprosy is not uncommon in South Africa. By the extraordinary chance this youth might have contracted it, his people would be placed in a very dreadful position, since they would desire to save him from segregation. Great secrecy would be needed to prevent rumors about getting about and subsequent interference by the authorities. A devoted medical man, if sufficiently paid, would easily be found to take charge of the sufferer. There would be no reason why the latter should not be allowed the freedom of dark. Bleaching of the skin is a common result of the disease. The case was a strong one, so strong that I determined to act as if it were actually proved. When on arriving, I noticed that Ralph, who carries out the meals, had gloves in which impregnated with disinfectants. My last doubts were removed. A single word showed you, sir, that your secret was discovered, and if I wrote rather than said it, it was to prove that you, by my discretion, was to be trusted. I was finishing this little analysis of the case when the door was opened, and the austere figure of the great dermatologist was ushered in. But for once his sphinx-like features had relaxed, and there was a warm humanity in his eyes. He strode up to Colonel Elmsworth and shook him by the hand. "It is not often my lot to bring ill tidings, but seldom good ones," he said. "This occasion is the more welcome. It is not leprosy." "What?" "A well-marked case of pseudo-leprosy, or ichthyosis. A scale-like affection of the skin, unsightly, obstinate, but possibly curable, and most certainly ineffective. Yes, Mr. Holmes, the coincidence is a remarkable one, but is it coincidence? There are not subtle forces here at work that we know little, as we are assured by the apprehension with which the young man has no doubt suffered terribly since his exposure to its contagion. It may not produce a physical effect that stimulates that which it fears. At any rate, I pledge my professional reputation, but the lady has fainted. I think that Mr. Kent had better be with her until she recovers from this joyous shock." Oh. I did altered. Oh. Thank you for the hydrating stretch. I did those while I was turning pages. For anyone who doesn't know, see if I actually typed it all right. Yep, I have. Altered is another story reader, streamer, and writer. We have a lot of those. So if any of you guys that are here would like to go give them a follow, by all means. We readers do have to kind of keep in touch sometimes. I lurk in your stream a lot, so. Ouch. Oh, get back to the bookshop. There we go. But anyway, that's the first two stories out of the case book of Sherlock Holmes. I also did the preface from Doyle himself, which, yeah. Let's see, who was on? See if I can find someone to raid. Let's see, Sophia has already ended. I don't know if Falco was reading. I think she was reading Jekyll and Hyde last time I looked. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, she's reading Frankenstein now. Cool. Yes, another hydrate. Thank you. Thank you, Guilty. And I didn't even finish off my blood orange tea this time around. So, do we want to hear more stories? Or do we want to scare people without doing scarier games anyway? Trying to see who all was on. You know, I see someone who might. If it'll finish loading. Let's see. Oh, they've been on 5 hours. I'm not sure how much longer they'll be on. Okay. Let's see. Pixel Doctor's on. Pixel Doctor's not on anymore. Okay. So I guess we can go ahead and raid Dusk. Okay. I do have my follower message, my sub message, and the Dusk message. So, I will see you all over there. I hope you all have a pleasant evening. Get some sleep if you're in that time zone. And yeah. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, whichever it may apply. Let's go see if we can spook Dusk. I will see you over there.